Hey Margaret, comments on week 4 about goal setting. Your post was good. You said a lot of information, but you kind of clearly thought about it, and that it was gratifying to see that what you thought was kind of an obvious point. Actually, when you start to unpack it, things start to become a bit more complicated, and particularly smart goals are actually very difficult to implement. So. It's easy to say something is a smart goal, but actually, really, when you look at it, it's it, it can be hard. And in particular, one important point is that all measures are proxies of goals, something that exists in the real world. And when you so there's always some gap between what you're measuring and the actual underlying concept. And so it's always a measure is always going to fall short in some degree. It's going to be there's always going to be a bit of a gap, and how big that gap and how severe it is affects kind of how an organisation needs to sort of work with its goals. How strictly it needs to adhere to them, whether they're guiding principles or whether they're very very specific measures. Um, the trouble is, the more you try to close that gap and counter all the problems and all the perverse incentives, you end up with more measures, and then by the time you end up with more measures, you end up with something that's too big and too complicated and costly and collapse into itself. But anyway, it's good to see you sort of working through this. On 4.2, the logic model, one thing you didn't mention as an input. So you started with you didn't actually describe the input. So critical to a logic model. And although not often so used as a theory of change, are the inputs. In particular for this is who are the target, who's the target audience, how are they selected, because uh, that's a fundamental part of any program. Is this for everybody or for some people? And if so, who? And then how do you identify them? And maybe the people who most need it are the people least likely to engage. How do you address that gap? These are very real problems. There's something about the outputs and outcomes. You had a few things in the outputs that I think really not really I would classify as outcomes. The best way to think about output is something that is the result of an activity, a direct result of an activity. It's within the management control of whoever's delivering, and generally it doesn't really, but in and of itself, it doesn't really have a meaning to anybody, and it's typically an event or a thing or an experience. Yeah, but they may be short-lived and ended. That's typically, there may be some exceptions to that. So some things like reduced crime. Probably people count as an outcome because reduced crime depends on a whole lot of factors, not just this one thing. So it's not within fully the control of the program. And also, reduced crime actually has some meaning as well in the lives of participants, right? The number of people participating in an event, may not have much meaning. Or if it's a training program, training program may not actually have much meaning, but it depends on how people use it and how it affects their lives and decisions. That's where the difference between outcome and output puts. I will send a video link to a guy who I think does a good job in explaining these. On your 4.3, the MVDovia. So you gave some thought, that was good. You listed down the objectives. You provided some commentary what you thought were what might be missing. So why do they not promote volunteerism? Is there a reason for that? I understand you don't necessarily have access fully to the organisation to be able to sort of go through these issues as to whether they thought about it and whether they declined it or not, and if so, why. But that's the sort of process that one goes through when thinking about setting goals. Also, the thing to be concerned about is I'm not one to advocate that every goal has to be like very highly defined and very very measurable to be useful. So goals, as hopefully you saw in the readings, provide a number of number of aspects. They can be a motivating force. So you have a vision. You can think, yes, I can achieve this. It's a drive you to action. But it also is a way of tracking progress. Also a way of assessing yourself, being held accountable. And each of those requires different levels of specificity. Yeah. So to be an inspiring and motivating doesn't necessarily have to make it be very measurable. But if you're looking for accountability or for improving, it helps to be measurable. So it's always difficult, sort of a balance between these things. So it's I wouldn't necessarily criticize an organisation for sort of fully defining their goals, because there may be, as I said, there's this gap between a measure and what you're really trying to do, and sometimes you kind of might need that gap. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's not a good thing. Anyway, but you gave it some thought, and you're very reflective on it, and you use the materials, and that's really kind of what I most want to see. All right, that's all. Thanks. Bye.